Hello, everybody. This is Paul Nison with Torah Life Ministries. Good morning, and I pray everyone's doing okay. We are going to be reading the scriptures live every single day. Thank you for joining us live. We're doing Numbers 25 this morning. If you want to turn to Numbers 25, we're up to the 25th chapter of Numbers. We're getting down to the last 10 chapters here of the book of Numbers, continuing to read a chapter every day. Now, I do believe it's important to read the scriptures in order. But I believe it's also important not to rush through the scriptures. So I'm not trying to rush through the scriptures, and I think doing a chapter a day is even rushing it, because we should maybe take a chapter a month if we truly want to understand it and dig deep into it. But the reason I do this is really just for you to be encouraged to read the scriptures live every single day and to read it with fellowship with others. But please don't not read it if you don't have fellowship or others there to read it with. It's the words of a wonderful Creator that He left us with, which has His will in it for us, and what His will is for us in His holy scriptures and His holy word. So we're going to be reading a very important chapter today, Numbers 25, and we've been leading up to this with the story of Balaam and Balak. So if you want to open that, and while you're doing that, I'm going to open up in a prayer here and do the Shema. So Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, Baruch Shem Kavo, Mahu Tov, Leolam Va'ed. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Elohim, Yahweh is one. Blessed is the name of His glorious kingdom for all eternity. Okay, so we have that done, and we're going to read Numbers chapter 25, and please share this with others. Let them know we're on live every morning at 5:30 during the week. On the weekends, it's a little bit later, usually around 10 a.m., but that varies on the weekend a little. And if you don't get a chance to catch the live readings, we have replays and all the videos up from the past on the website, Torah Life Ministries, and also the YouTube page, Torah Life Ministries. The website is torahlifeministries.org. Numbers 25, we're going to continue to read about Moab seducing Israel, and then we're going to see the culprit of this is Balaam, who seemed all nice and everything else, but appears that he wasn't so holy after all. So we're going to look at that. But the chapter opens up right off and says, while the Israelites were camped at Acacia Grove, and Acacia is the wood that was used in most of the things the Israelites built at that time, from the furniture in the tabernacle to the tabernacle things itself. This was a common thing that was used back then, and this place, you could say, was almost named after that particular tree or that type of wood. It says, some of the men defiled themselves by having sexual relations with local Moabite women. Now, Yahweh made it clear to the Israelites up to this point not to mingle the seed. And He further spoke to them about it when He says in the scriptures, when you come out of Canaan, Egypt where you were, and you go into Canaan, do not follow the customs and the practices of them. We see later in the future of the scripture, King Solomon ignoring these instructions, mingling the seed tremendously, and ultimately worshiping other gods. So Yahweh tells them over and over again not to mingle the seed. And the seed here being not necessarily Egypt or the nations of the world versus Israel, but the seed being believers in a wonderful Creator versus non-believers in a wonderful Creator. And when it mentions here the Moabite women, or the Moabite, these women were not worshiping Yahweh by any means. They were worshiping their pagan gods of this pagan culture. And the harm there is, well, there's much harm there from obviously the physical side of things, but from the spiritual side of things, this is how they're led astray. You see, it's very difficult to attack, almost impossible to attack people that are blessed by Yahweh from the outside. This is why when Yahweh willed it for them to be victorious, it didn't matter how big a camp was against them, they were going to be victorious. But from the inside, history shows us that's where destruction comes from. And this was no different with the camp back then. It was from the inside they would begin to be destroyed. So here they were on the last approach to go into the promised land and about to go in there. And Yahweh still had some cleansing to do. Most of the original, if not all of the original nation that was rebelling were already dead. And this was their descendants trying to make it into the promised land. Still, many of them were going to be wiped out before they went into the promised land. And it was this plague right here. And if it was not for a fellow named Phinehas, which we're going to read about, it would have been a lot more. And we're going to read about this courageous man here in a moment. So verse 25, as it says, while the Israelites were camped at Acacia Grove, some of them defiled themselves by having sexual relations with local Moabite women. And the note here says, this verse shows the great challenge that Israel had to face. The most dangerous problem for Moses and Joshua was not Jericho's hostile army, but the ever-present temptation to compromise with the pagan Canaanite religion and cultures. And again, the warning was given over and over again to Israel not to mingle the seed, but they didn't listen. As we continue here, in verse 2 says, these women invited them to attend sacrifices to their Elohim or their gods, so that Israel feasted with them and worshiped the gods of Moab. And the extreme danger here that's taking place is something, I'm sad to say, that takes place every single day in our world. The mingling of the seed, the combining of a believer with a non-believer. Some people say you need to be equally yoked. Well, technically everyone's equally yoked because so few people actually believe in Yahweh and have faith in Yahweh. When you find two believers that have faith in Yahweh, it's very difficult for something to break that foundation. But when you see the weakness and the lack of faith of people today, and the so-called believer, even a strong believer, running to mingle the seed with the non-believer, usually it's the believer that thinks, well, I'll just win them over, but it ends up being the non-believer that ends up winning them over, just like we saw here. You had the Israelites who actually seen many of the miracles that Yahweh performed with their own eyes, and still the temptation of the flesh overtook them, or I shall say the temptation of the enemy overtook them much quicker than anything else. And note here says, the Bible doesn't say how the Israelites' men got involved in sexual immorality. We do know that the sacred prostitution was a common practice among the Canaanite religions. At first, they didn't think about worshiping idols. They were just interested in sex. Before long, they started attending local feasts and family celebrations that involved idol worship. Soon they were in over their heads, absorbed into the practices of the pagan culture. Their desires for fun and pleasure caused them to loosen their spiritual commitment. Have you relaxed your standards in order to justify your desires? And when I read this, the first thing I think about is the fourth commandment, the holy Sabbath day. One of the things the system of Judaism does that I don't mind if it doesn't make it harder to keep the original commandment is put a fence around that commandment to make it even more difficult to break it. Now, in many of the things they do with this fence, it makes it harder to actually keep the commandment, and in no way do I agree with that, and I think Yeshua himself had an issue with that. But to go to the extreme to keep something, I'm okay with that part of it. And I look at the Sabbath, where there's so many different things going on the Sabbath day that are people just continuously breaking the Sabbath. I'll take, for example, a college football game. A Saturday is their day to do this. So you could have a stadium of 50,000 people breaking the Sabbath on this Saturday to watch a college football game. And here somebody might invite you to the game, and you could try to justify it in your mind and say, well, it's a Sabbath, now technically we should be worshiping and fellowshipping with believers and in Yahweh's word. Well, we could say, well, I'll go to the game, but I won't buy anything. I won't, I might even justify it by wearing a shirt that proclaims Yeshua. And so we innocently go there thinking we're not going to be sucked into the temptation of 50,000 people around us breaking the Sabbath. Well, we'll keep the Sabbath. We won't spend any money. We won't do anything. The next thing you know, you're sitting there and continuing to justify and water down your commitment to a wonderful creator. And you spent more time watching a football game with all these non-believers than you did actually in the Word, because you start realizing you don't have time for the Word and a football game, and you're choosing a football game. And many of you watching might not be interested in football, but it's the point of not partaking in pagan practices in general, but definitely not going against our Creator's instructions on His holy day and being taken away from this. Well, this is what happened with the men of Israel. They didn't have a thought about worshiping other gods. They had a thought of just the sexual pleasure they were going to get from these women that were available. And slowly but surely, they started worshiping other gods. If you open the door a crack, the enemy will kick it open. Leave that door shut. Don't open a temptation, folks. But this is what happened here. Remember, it's very difficult to be attacked from the outside. It's from the inside. It's like the enemy can't harm us physically, but he can destroy us mentally. And that's what he does. And we need to consider that. So we continue reading a note here. It says, the combination of sexual sin and idolatry, it turns out, was Balaam's idea. So now we see, because it says in verse 3, in this way Israel joined the worship of Baal of Peor, causing Yahweh's anger to blaze against his people. So once again, we have the destruction of these people and what they did. And we see it says, see 31:16. And if we turn to chapter 31:16 of Numbers, we see here it says, in chapter 31:16, these are the very ones who follow Balaam's advice and caused the people of Israel to rebel against Yahweh at Mount Peor. They are the ones who caused the plague to strike Yahweh's people. And we've seen in our studies, and what I've seen, and I bring it out, that the plague of Yahweh, there were three major outcomes. One of them was starvation, another of them was disease, and the final of them was death. These were the three results of the plagues that the people brought upon themselves. And that's what happened here. And then it says in this note here, the combination of the sexual sin and the idolatry was Baal's idea. And we swing over to Revelations 31:16. Now, we're not going to read the book of Revelations for quite a while if we're reading the scriptures here in order. But if we swing over there to just see here, 31:16. See, you got all the way in the beginning in the Torah, you got the story of Balaam and Balak. And for those of you that say, well, the Old Testament is no longer important because we got the New Testament. Well, all the New Testament is referencing to the Old Testament and the original covenant, and it was never done away with. We go all the way to Revelations 31, actually Revelations 2:14, and Revelations 2:14, we see it right here, suggesting and saying, but I have a few complaints against you. You tolerate some among you whose teaching is like that of Balaam, who showed Balak how to trip up the people of Israel. He taught them to sin by eating food offered to idols and by committing the sexual sin. And then it goes on to say in a similar way, and then it goes on to give you the issues that he had with Israel and all the issues there. But that was one of the major issues here. It says the same Balaam who had just blessed Israel and who had appeared to be on their side. It is easy to see how the Israelites were misled, for Balaam seemed to say and do all the right things, at least for a while, not until Balaam had inflicted great damage on them, and the Israelites realized that they were greedy, used sorcery, and deeply involved in pagan religion practices. We must be careful to weigh both the words and the deeds of those who claim to offer us spiritual health. And we see these women, that the Israelites took place in worshiping with the people of Baal Peor. And Baal was the name of the popular god of Canaan, the land Israel was about to enter. represented by a bull, a symbol of strength and fertility. He was the god of the rains and the harvest. The Israelites were continually attacked by Baal worship, in which prostitution played a large part throughout their years in Canaan. Because Baal was so popular, his name was often used as a genetic title for all the other local gods. And how we could equate this to today and what we have going on today is Islam. So this is like the Islam and the temptation of Islam. And now you have the mega churches in the United States practicing, in the name of so-called peace, something called Chrislam, which is a mingling of Christianity and Islam. Just taking the things that are appealing to the flesh in both of these practices and making them into one new religion. And the mega churches of the United States are doing these things today. It's no different than was done back then. That Yahweh, it says his anger blazed against them. And then when we see the outcome and the result that happened from these things, in verse 4 it says, Yahweh issued the following command to Moses: seize all the ringleaders and execute them before Yahweh in broad daylight, so his fierce anger will turn away from the people of Israel. So to take all the leaders who are leading this revolt by mingling the seed and with the non-believers and taking charge of this. It says here in verse 5. So Moses orders Israel's judges, each of you must put to death the men under your authority who have joined in worshiping Baal of Peor. And it says, so now if I would have turned my Bible up just to this part, I would have been like, what a mean God this is. He's just going to kill his own people. But we see how he was tested over and over again, and he gave them mercy and grace over and over again. But this time, they just took it too far, like they always took it too far. It says, just as one of the Israelite men brought a Midianite woman into his tent, right before the eyes of Moses and all the people, as everyone was weeping, weeping at the tent of the tabernacle, when Phinehas, son of Eleazar, and grandson of Aaron, so the priest, saw this. So this man was, and he was a leader, was bringing a Canaanite woman into his tent without any disregard for whatever the impression it's going to make on the other people. And that's what happened. It kept growing. People said, well, if they're doing it, why can't I do it? And that same thing has happened in the church today with the breaking of the Sabbath, with the not following our Creator's days, with following pagan holidays. It continues to get worse and worse. And people try to justify it because that's not only what they're taught, that's what everyone's doing. And that's no justification at all. That's why it says in Yah's word, the path is narrow and only few will find it. And it says here, so when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar and grandson of Aaron the priest, saw this. So now we first see who he was, and this is Phinehas was, and this is why it's so important to read the lines. So we were very familiar with Aaron, we were very familiar with Eleazar, and now the son of Eleazar. Aaron was his own granddaddy. He saw this, and he jumped up and left the assembly. He took a spear and rushed after the man into his tent. And Phinehas thrust a spear all the way through the man's body and into the woman's stomach. So the plague against Israel was stopped. But because of this, not only were people seeing the righteousness of this, but people were seeing the end of this plague. And it says, but not before 24,000 people had died. 24,000 people had died in this plague. And you talk about history and the plagues around the world and the Black Plague and all of this. And then you talk about this plague that ended in death, of course. 24,000 people died. And the note here says, this man brought a Midianite woman into his tent, meant that she was brought into his tent for sex. Zemrai, who's the man, so disregarded the law of Yahweh that he brought the woman right into the camp. And then Phinehas comes and he takes charge here and he does this. It says it is clear from Phinehas' story that some anger is proper and justified. Phinehas was angry because of his zeal for Yahweh. But how can we know when our anger is appropriate and when it should be restrained? Ask these questions when you become angry. Why am I angry? Whose rights are being violated, mine or others? Is the truth, a principle of Yahweh, being violated? If only your rights are at stake, it may be wiser to keep angry feelings under control. But if the truth is at stake, anger is often justified, although violence and retaliation are usually the wrong way to express it. Phinehas' case was unique. If we are becoming more and more like Yahweh, we should be angered by sin. You know, when we become believers, something needs to change our heart. We should love what he loves and hate what he hates. And if that hasn't changed, you need to question where your heart truly is. And Phinehas' heart obviously was zealous for Yahweh. But after 24,000 people had died, verse 10 says, then Yahweh said to Moses, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the grandson of Aaron, the priest, has turned my anger away from the Israelites by being as zealous among them as I was. So I stopped destroying all Israel as I has intended to do in my zealous anger. Now tell him that I am making my special covenant of peace with him. In this covenant, I give him and his descendants a permanent right to the priesthood for his zeal for me, his Elohim. He purified the people of Israel, making them right with me. One of the most courageous acts in Scripture was what Phinehas did here to save the people. The note here says, Phinehas' act made atonement for the nation of Israel. In effect, what he did averted Yahweh's judgment. Because of this, his descendants would become the high priest of Israel. They continued so throughout the history of the tabernacle and the temple. One man was able to save a whole nation through this act. And it says, the Israelite men killed the Midianite woman named Zemrai, son of the Israelite man killed the Midianite woman. Let me reread that in verse 14. It says, the Israelite man killed with the Midianite woman was named Zumrai, son of Saul, leader of the family from the tribe of Simon. The woman's name was Cosbi. She was the daughter of Zor, the leader of the Midianite clan. So not only was she just a Moabite woman, she was a daughter of a leader of a Midianite clan. Then Yahweh said to Moses, attack the Midianites and destroy them, because they assaulted you with deceit and trickery, tricked you into worshiping Baal of Peor, and because of Cosbi, the daughter of the Midianite leader, who was killed at the time of the plague, and what happened at Peor. And we see the trouble with mingling the seed. Not only the 24,000 die of the Israelites, but then the Moabites as well, and Moabites as well. And this is just a great example of the Jezebel spirit, and how men, mighty warriors of Israel who have seen miracles, can be tempted and swayed by the physical appearance of a woman. How they were so still in the flesh that they were not able to choose Yahweh. And the word says, today I give you for you life or death, and choose life so you may live. And the flesh of the eye, the unholy eye, and the fleshful desires overtook them, and they couldn't stop themselves from mingling the seed and getting themselves in some serious situations, some serious danger. So we need to be aware of that and remember this chapter. It's imperative because so many people today continue to mingle the seed, and we need to love Yahweh's word so much that we want to protect it and go to the extreme. So the next time you get tempted, whether it's a Sabbath day going to a football game or some other public event where there's a whole bunch of other people continually breaking his Sabbath, and you think, well, I'm just going to innocently go there and I'm not going to partake in that. I'm just going to go and just hang out. Well, you've got to think about here what happened when we mingle the seed and we surround ourselves with all these non-believers, especially on a day that's supposed to be set apart for Yahweh. So we remember him consistently. You know, if you have an appointment, let's say you got to go to visit a doctor, which I don't necessarily always recommend. But if you have an appointment with the most popular doctor in town and you're supposed to meet with him on this particular day, and you waited a whole week to get this appointment, and your appointment's finally there, and then what happens? You miss the appointment to go do something else. You know, that doesn't please our Creator. And you know, the Sabbath is a holy appointment. We got yearly appointments and we got daily appointments. We don't want to wait a whole nother year. We don't want to wait a whole nother week for those appointments. We got to meet with him. Same thing with your spouse. If you have a date with them, you know, let's say every Wednesday night at 7 p.m., but here comes Wednesday night at 7 p.m. and you don't show up. Week after week, you're out doing something else. You know, they're not going to be too happy with you. Well, you might think, well, it's just this one time I won't show up. Well, still, he won't be happy with you, or they won't be happy with you. So consider that when we think about the special meeting time we're supposed to have with our Creator on the set-apart day of the Sabbath, and just in general, the mingling of the seed of what we do and what we're not doing, those two things. So let's close off today with the Aaronic benediction in Numbers 6:24-26. Yerikaka, Yahweh, Virishmika, Raka, Yair, Yahweh, Panana, Laka, Vokinika, Yosi, Yahweh, Panana, Alaka, Vasem, Aka, Shalom. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen and hallelujah. Thank you for joining this morning, everybody. Please remind everybody we're here every day, and have a blessed day, and go out there and don't mix the seed today, okay? And may Yahweh bless you that are seeking him. And we'll see you tomorrow, same time, at 5:30 in the morning, Yahweh willing. Until then, everybody, shalom, shalom.